Games, love, and relationships. Following that, at 7 o'clock is Barron's Magazine, and at 8 o'clock we have the Toronto Star. Stay with us for these readings and more. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Donald, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 5th issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Lenders tighten standards in private credit. Under pressure from investors, firms are increasing costs and curbing sweeteners. By Anna Maria Andradis. The era of anything goes in private credit underwriting is coming to an end. Private credit firms are tightening their lending standards, increasing interest rates and other fees they are charged on new loans, retraining how much debt they give borrowers, and closing loopholes that allow financing to be taken out against borrowers' assets. Executive and lawyers said standards began shifting around March and have intensified since then. Fund managers said they are seeing more risk of loan losses in the market. They are also dealing with the repercussions of increased scrutiny from their investors, which have reduced the amount of money private credit firms have to put to work. For months, individual investors have worried about potential risk in their underlying loans made by private credit and responded by pulling billions of dollars out of the private credit funds. Executives in the industry have said that this is overreaction, but they are moving to share more information and calm the jitters. But a Blackstone fund, the biggest of the group, reported on Thursday that investors were continuing to ask for the money back. The tighter standards are a sharp reversal from recent years, when a rapid growth of private credit fueled competition, leading lenders to offer sweeteners and generous terms to win deals. One of the benefits of the noise in the market and some of the outflows is wealth is you're seeing less competitive pressure in the market, said Michael Argetti, chief executive at Ares Management, an investor conference last week. So it has gone from maybe a borrower-friendly market to a lender-friendly market, and that's a good place to be. A new loan organization, lenders are tacking a bigger margin on the base interest rates, especially for larger companies. For companies with more than 100 million in earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, the median margin and common structure of new debt increased in the direct lending market was 5.13% in May, compared to 5% in April, and 4.88% in March, according to investment banking advisor Lincoln International. That is the highest it has been in nearly 2 years. Loans that aren't top credit quality are also seeing margin increases. Beyond interest rates, loans are getting more expensive in other ways. Private credit lenders are increasing the fee they charge when they issue a loan, what the industry calls original issue discount, which lowers the amount the borrower actually receives For instance, at the end of last year, borrowers of $100 million loans were on average only getting $99.15 million after this fee, though they have to repay the full $100 million plus interest. As of the end of April, the average is down to $98.96 million according to Lincoln International, equivalent to a $1.04 million charge right off the bat. In some cases, it is much larger. Charles Bank Capital Partners recently offered a private equity firm's target a roughly $100 million loan with a discount of about 5%, equivalent to a $5 million fee, people familiar with the matter said. After reviewing the company's financials, Charles Bank felt the discount was appropriate for the risk of the loan, the people said. Others have cut back on offering adjustments that help make their loans more enticing to borrowers, executives said, including allowing borrowers to defer interest payments. Some lenders are applying more conservative underwriting criteria to entire industries because of the threat AI poses. Guggenheim Investments is scrutinizing accounting firms and other white-collar service companies out of concern the artificial intelligence could potentially take out whole businesses. It is lowering the leverage borrowers can build, tightening loan-to-value ratios, and seeking stricter documentation in cases where it isn't sure which firms would be winners or losers in the AI future. When we have to debate who is going to win and who is going to lose, we want to be conservative, said Joe McCurdy, head of organization in Guggenheim Investments. Corporate Credit Group solving it with lower leverage rather than price makes sense to us because if you start out conservative, it gives you more cushion if you're wrong. Israel-Lebanon ceasefire showing strains. Skirmishes continue, and as Hezbollah says, it won't cede ground while troops remain. By Dov Leiber and Omar Abdel Bekwai. Israel and Lebanon's renewed ceasefire came under pressure within hours of its agreement, as Israel and Hezbollah militants exchanged fire on Thursday, and both sides cast doubt on the extent of their participation in the agreement. The deal, hammered out this week in talks among Lebanese, Israel, and U.S. officials, is contingent on Hezbollah halting attacks on Israel forces and withdrawing fighters from heavily contested southern Lebanon, the U.S. State Department said. Both Israel and Hezbollah cast doubt on the durability of the ceasefire hours after it was signed, with Israel saying it would continue its offensive in southern Lebanon and Hezbollah rejecting critical elements of the fragile plan. The Iran-backed militant group's leader, Naam Qassem, in a speech Thursday, demanded a full Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon before Hezbollah would cease its attacks, and said Tehran was negotiating in its own version of a ceasefire with Lebanon. The declaration is a roadmap for the annihilation of a section of the Lebanese people and the enslavement of the rest, Qassem said. Hezbollah said it targeted several Israeli military positions in Lebanon south on Thursday, and Lebanese media said several Israeli airstrikes hit southern Lebanon. The Israeli military didn't immediately respond to requests for comment. In addition to being a Shiite militant movement, Hezbollah is also a political party in Lebanon with seats in the country's parliament. Hezbollah's military activities are independent of central government decision making, and Lebanese leaders have had the trouble reining in the Iranian backed group. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said Thursday that the agreement allowed Israel to continue its operation in southern Lebanon, including raising what Israel says is militant infrastructure. Katz said Israeli retains freedom of action against Hezbollah until the militant group leaves southern Lebanon, and that residents there wouldn't be able to return until the ceasefire conditions were met. Amid that standoff, it was unclear Thursday how the ceasefire would be implemented. The parties to the agreement didn't say where the Lebanese military would begin its gradual takeover of southern Lebanon or how long such a process would take. Previous such deals haven't endured for long. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office didn't respond to requests for comment. A Lebanese military official said the army hadn't yet received orders to reassert itself in the south. President Trump suggested an Israeli-Lebanon ceasefire was in the offering on Monday, the same day Trump had contentious phone calls with Netanyahu over the Israeli Prime Minister's desire to attack Hezbollah positions in Beirut, Lebanon's capital, in response to militant drone attacks into northern Israel. Iran, in turn, threatened to halt peace talks with the U.S. and restart strikes on Israel if Israeli forces hit Beirut. President Trump's personal intervention has proven to be the most reliable source of restraint for Israelis' freedom of military action, said David Wood, senior Lebanon analyst at the International Crisis Group, a Brussels-based think tank. President Trump's overriding priority in the region right now is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and reach some kind of acceptable arrangement with Iran. Washington's interest in stabilizing Lebanon is largely conditional on the situation with Iran. Fighting has continued despite Trump's announcement. On Wednesday, Israel carried out airstrikes it said targeted Hezbollah militants, while Hezbollah continued attacks against Israel ground forces that had crossed into Lebanon. Israel has been razing swaths of Lebanese villages along the border with Israel, creating what it says is a buffer zone against Lebanese militants. Trump pressed Netanyahu in April to scale back attacks in Lebanon, which Israel agreed to do before gradually stepping up its offensive amid Hezbollah drone attacks on its troops. A previous Lebanon-Israel deal, agreed in November of 2024, also proved flimsy, with Israel striking Lebanon thousands of times as Hezbollah rearmed while the agreement was in effect. Wednesday's deal, like previous ceasefire agreements, calls for the disarmament of Hezbollah and for the Lebanese military to assert control across the country. But Lebanon's weak army hasn't aggressively confronted Hezbollah, concerned it would stoke civil conflict. The U.S., which has funded and trained Lebanese troops, says it will continue to support the country's military. After the November 2024 deal, Lebanese troops made strides in destroying Hezbollah weapon caches and military infrastructure in the Israeli-Lebanon border area south of the Litani River. But even that progress came about only with the help from Israeli intelligence and the grudging acquaintances of Hezbollah, which was battered by Israeli operations and facing domestic pressure to reduce the level of violence. By March, however, the Lebanese army had pulled out and Hezbollah had returned, skirmishing with Israel forces when they entered southern Lebanon. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Canceled statues stage a comeback. Columbus Confederate monuments regulated to storage get another look. By Cameron McWhither, Columbus, Ohio. The statue wars that swept away monuments 6 years ago are back. This time the battle is to restore them. Traditionalists are suing and lobbying local governments to resurrect memorials to Confederate generals, founding fathers, and European explorers. Many of the statues disappeared from town squares and other public places during the pandemic-era protests against police violence and racism following George Floyd's murder in 2020. Ohio's capital, named for Christopher Columbus, took down a 22-foot-high, 3-ton statue of his namesake from City Hall that year. Officials declared the gift from sister city Gianna, Italy, had come to represent patriarchy, oppression, and divisiveness. We will no longer live in the shadow of our ugly past, Mayor Andrew Ginther, a Democrat, said at the time. Columbus detractors tie the Italian explorer to the brutal subjugation of native civilians in Americas. His supporters say Columbus should be lauded for his discoveries, not blamed for what followed. The city's Columbus statue for now lies on its back inside a fenced storage facility, monitored by security cameras and adorned from head to toe with a strand of yellow caution tape. In April, a coalition of Italian-American groups filed a federal lawsuit claiming the statue's removal was illegal and demanding its return. The silent majority is becoming vocal, said Jack Conte, 67 years old, the suit's organizer. You reach a point where this stuff is shoved down your throat and you can only take so much of it. The Trump administration is helping lead the charge ahead of the nation's 250th anniversary next month. In March, the administration erected a Columbus statue near the White House, a replica of the one that protesters sank in Baltimore's Inner Harbor in 2020. The replica was donated by the Conference of Presidents of Major Italian-American Organizations. The group's president, Basil Russo, a former Democratic politician from Cleveland, said Columbus had become a scapegoat for Western colonization. In a thank you letter to Russo, Trump lauded Columbus as the original American hero and one of the most gallant and visionary men to ever walk on the face of the earth. Russo himself can't believe Columbus took down its statue. It's the name of their city, he said. What sense does that make? The Interior Department recently installed the statue of Caesar Rodney, a Delaware signer of the Declaration of Independence and a slave owner, in Washington's Freedom Plaza. The monument had been removed from its spot in Wilmington, Delaware in 2020 and put into storage. You either celebrate the 250th and the historic people and events and enter into the drama of the heroic choices made by the revolutionary generation, said Vince Haley, an advisor to the president on anniversary initiatives, or you leave it to those who would readily distort our history and use it as a political instrument. Nicole Moore said certain statues shouldn't return to public spaces. She is president of the National Council on Public History, which represents historians and museum administrators. Humans are complicated, but what's not complicated is racism. What's not complicated is genocide, she said. When we know the history, we have to ask ourselves, do we want to celebrate this person? Take it down. In December, a stone highway marker honoring Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, suddenly appeared in Marion Square, planted alongside a major thoroughfare and a hub of picnics, farmers markets, and celebrations in Charleston, South Carolina. At a subsequent meeting of the city's Commission on History, Dale Telling, one of the commissioners, explained that Charleston had agreed to release the monument to the United Daughters of the Confederacy. The group dropped a lawsuit against the city that it had filed after the statue was pulled from a public school in 2021 and put into storage. Lee's return to public view was aided by locale. Marion Square is owned by a private organization, the Board of Field Officers for the 4th Brigade of the South Carolina Militia, which got the land from the city in 1833. The 4th Brigade granted a request to erect a monument in Marion Square, said Telling, who also serves in as the group's chairman. Wilmot Frazier, the sole black member of the City History Commission, called the monument a monstrosity. He turned to speak directly to Telling during the meeting in the city's council chambers, adorned with a portrait of George Washington. I'm hoping that you would, especially since you're a decent man, Dale, that you would prevail upon whoever is conspiring to resurrect the Confederacy to remove this thing, the 86-year-old Frazier said. Take that thing down and let it stay down. I don't know the people that are trying to resurrect the Confederacy, Telling replied. Obviously someone is, Frazier said, because someone resurrected that monument. No, sir, that's not the goal, Telling said. The 4th Brigade, he said, is here to protect South Carolinians, particularly Charleston's, military history, and that's what this is. Frazier suggested a Confederate graveyard was a more appropriate home. The city's legal counsel later advised that Charleston no longer had a say in the matter because the monument now sat on private property. In March, the Texas Rangers baseball team announced on social media the return to public view of a One Riot, One Ranger statue at the ballpark. The 12-foot bronze sculpture of a Texas Ranger had been removed from Dallas Love Field Airport in 2020 after claims that the officer who served as the model of the statue, a tribute to the law enforcement agency, sided with opponents to desegregate a public high school in 1956. The Texas Rangers have long occupied a revered place in Texas history dating to the creation of the organization over 200 years ago, the ball club said when a statue was announced. Hundreds of comments followed the online announcement. Hell yeah, need to bust all our history out there has been stowed away, one said. Racist, bigoted, backward move by the Texas Rangers, another said. Representative Mark Vassie, D. Texas, wrote to the team, celebrating the legacy of someone connected to blocking integration is not preserving history, it's glorifying injustice. In Louisiana, state lawmakers passed a bill to allow the state to take custody of statues removed by local governments and put them in state parks. Officials in New Orleans, which had removed several Confederate statues, resisted. These statues are city property, Mayor Helena Morano said in May. You can't just, by some kind of legislation, take them away. Last straw. Columbus, Ohio's fastest growing big city, was named in the 1800s by a local admirer of the explorer. The city's emblem and its flag display the Santa Maria, Columbus's flagship, which led the way in the transatlantic voyage in 1492. The Columbus Day Parade became a civic institution. A wooden replica of Santa Maria was docked in the Scotia River near the city hall for decades. The Italian Village neighborhood named a park for Columbus. Columbus State Community College had its statue on its campus. At City Hall, Columbus stood atop a stone pedestal. Over the years, as some historians soured on Columbus' treatment of Native Americans, said the impact of colonization had followed his discovery, the city began removing his many tributes. In 2014, Columbus dismantled the Santa Maria. Its rotting parts lie in the grass near a city sewage treatment plant. The city renamed Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day in 2018. Columbus Park is now called Warren Square Park for its location in Warren Street. Columbus State removed its Columbus statue in June 2020, and the Columbus statue at City Hall came down shortly after. Yet, the seafarer wasn't entirely forgotten. The city initiated what turned into 2 years of community meetings under the banner Reimagining Columbus. The goals were to find a new home for the statue and providing expanded historical context. When I was a kid, Christopher Columbus was a hero, said Conte, who founded the municipal exercise exasperating. At one meeting, he said a facilitator handed out crayons and asked participants to draw in their favorite colors. All these kumbaya things, said Conte, who heads the companies in water pipeline work and fiber optic construction. After the fifth or sixth one, I went up to the lady and I said, I thought we were here to talk about the statue. The meetings yielded the idea of a new park and a new section of the state and interpretive signs. But there was no funding allocated or location set aside. For Conte, that was the last straw. Conte organized the Friends of Christopher Columbus Foundation, enlisting local Italian American groups. They're not listening to anything we're saying or asking, Conte said. Shelley Corbin, a Native American activist who participated in the reimagining meetings, found the federal suit disheartening. Everyone's trying to hang on to what's comfortable, and I get it because we live in a very turbulent, uncomfortable times, she said. But history isn't one-sided, and people get to speak their stories. Isaiah Bohaman, 22, who works in marketing, sees the Columbus statue as representing a historic movement for the Western world. Who is Solomon Chase? He said, invoking the 19th century Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Ohio with a statue at the state capitol. I never heard of him, and he has a statue. but I have heard of Christopher Columbus. I think he deserves a statue. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Tehran escalates tensions with Kuwait airport attack by Stephen Kalin. Kuwait had just reopened its war-damaged international airport when a drone smashed into Terminal 1 on Wednesday, an attack that demonstrated Iran's ratcheting up of moves to counter a crippling U.S. economic blockade. The strike came after the U.S. military disabled a ship it said was heading to an Iranian port. Iran denied hitting the airport, but video footage released on Thursday by Kuwait civil aviation authorities showed what looked like an Iranian Shahed drone slamming into the roof and erupting into a ball of fire. Images inside the building showed flying glass and plumes of smoke in a cavernous passenger hall where people ran for cover. One person was killed and dozens were injured. It was the third time the Kuwait, a rich oil sheikdom the size of New Jersey, has come under fire in about a week, despite a ceasefire that ended major combat between the U.S. and Iran. It was the first conflict-related death recorded outside Iran in nearly 2 months of skirmishing. The attack echoed Iran's tactics earlier in the war, when it struck airports and other relatively vulnerable economic infrastructure around the Mideast to put pressure on the U.S. and Israeli to end their air campaign. Hitting Kuwait signaled a willingness to escalate without attacking more sensitive sites in the Persian Gulf, more powerful states that have struck back against Iran. Kuwait, which historically maintained ties with Tehran, has shown less willingness than neighbors to engage diplomatically with it during the conflict. It recently arrested Iranian parliamentary troops it said were trying to infiltrate the country by sea, and on Wednesday expelled 2 Iranian diplomats in response to the strikes. Iran has demanded its citizens be returned. Iran views Kuwait as an easier, vulnerable Gulf state versus other countries in the region such as Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, said Umar Karman, Associate Fellow at the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies. Trump will have to consider a risk of greater consequences if the U.S. continues to disable ships going to and from Iran as part of the U.S. blockade of Iran's ports, a response to Tehran's chokehold on the strategic Strait of Hormuz. Neighbors and allies, including the U.S., condemned the attacks, but there have been no military response. The Wednesday morning strike, which also hit U.S. military bases in Kuwait and Bahrain, ratcheted up weeks of tit-for-tat attacks in the U.S. as U.S. talks on a framework for ending the war stall. It also raises the questions about Washington's security commitment to Gulf allies, which have been borne the brunt of the war's impact outside Iran, and say privately they feel the U.S. has done more focused on protecting Israel. Gulf states' concerns were inflamed in May when Trump and U.S. top military officials shrugged off Iranian attacks on shipping in strategic UAE oil port. Besides anger at Iran, the mood towards the U.S. and Kuwait and the rest of the Gulf has been frustration, said Badr al-Safi, an expert on Persian Gulf and Arabian affairs at Kuwait University. You got us into this war. You didn't consult us. You didn't listen to us. Nothing, he said. We've been a sacrificial lamb. The failure of negotiations to reach a conclusive end to the war doesn't bode well for U.S. Gulf ties, Shavi said. We are witnessing a changing U.S. and the result, a changing Kuwait as well, he said. Iran said Wednesday's strikes were in retaliation for recent U.S. attacks on its territory and ships trying to access its ports, which U.S. and Kuwaiti officials denied were launched from Kuwait. Bolton reaches plea deal in classified information case by C. Ryan Barber and Sadie Gurman. John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor to President Trump during his first term, has reached a deal with federal prosecutors to plead guilty to unlawfully retaining classified information, according to people familiar with the matter. Under the deal's terms, Bolton is set to plead guilty to a single charge of illegally retaining classified information he had collected for a memoir that painted an unflattering portrait of the president and to pay a $2.25 million fine. He could face up to 5 years in prison. The plea deal, which requires a federal judge's approval, would deliver Trump a victory in his administration's crusade to prosecute his perceived enemies, bringing the first conviction and a string of cases that have otherwise hit roadblocks in the courts. Bolton, 77, initially pleaded not guilty in October to the 18-count indictment, which charged him with mishandling classified information for allegedly sharing more than 1,000 pages of diary-like entries about his daily activities in the Trump White House. The charges came 2 months after FBI agents searched his Washington office and home in Bethesda, Maryland. The indictment added to a string of cases that the Justice Department has initiated against prominent critics of the president. While it carried out a tinge of politics, the Bolton case stood apart from others in that it arose out of a longer, more conventional investigation, and career prosecutors viewed it as on a firmer footing. A notice Thursday in a federal court in Greenbelt, Maryland, where Bolton was indicted, said a hearing in the case was set for June 26. A spokesman for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland declined to comment. The plea deal was earlier reported by CNN. In the indictment last year, prosecutors alleged that Bolton sent the diary-like dispatches to two relatives identified by people familiar with the investigation as his wife and daughter. In preparation for his memoir published in 2020, The Room Where It Happened. The indictment indicated that classified information might have been exposed when the Iranian hackers got into Bolton's personal email account and gained access to the material he had shared. Community battles emerge over who pays to power AI. Phoenix is the test case as tech giants push to build data centers and electric rates rise. By Jennifer Hiller. Phoenix. A new style of architecture is rising in the sprawling suburbs of the Saharan Desert. Windowless data centers that hum 24 hours a day and guzzle as much electricity as a mid-sized city. As Microsoft and other tech giants expand their footprints in one of the nation's largest data center markets, a high-stakes battle is unfolding over how to pay for the massive power grid upgrades needed to drive the AI revolution. Arizona Public Service, the state's largest utility, is in the center of the firestorm. APS is proposing a 45% electricity rate increase for extra large energy users, primarily data centers, and a roughly 14.5% increase for residential customers. Not everyone is unhappy. Consumer advocates warn that the plan would shift the financial risk of the AI build out to households already struggling with high summer electricity bills and temperatures that often hit triple digits. If the AI boom fizzles or the energy consumption of that data center wanes, the worry residents could be left paying off the infrastructure upgrades for years to come now. Microsoft, which operates 3 big data centers in Phoenix's West Valley, says that it is paying its own way for needed upgrades of the grid, but contends the utility has a flawed approach to paying for a new generation. APS says its plan would ensure growth pays for growth. We're making sure that they are paying their fair share, said Ted Geisler, chief executive of APS and parent company Pinnacle West Capital. These data centers require entire power plants to build just for them or entire transmission lines. That's why we've got to modernize the rate tariffs. The debate is part of a national tug of war. Similar fights over how to pay for the grid build out have erupted in Texas, North Carolina, and other markets, where residential power consumers face large increase proposals. The stakes are high. Electricity prices are rising faster than inflation and have become a bipartisan political issue. Residential customers across the U.S. saw their electricity rates climb 32% on average between 2020 and 2025. In Arizona, the jump was 26%. The U.S. is rushing to build infrastructure to stay ahead of China in the AI race, but consumer backlash is snowballing. Beyond their voracious appetite for electricity, data centers face criticism for their massive land and water use. U.S. electricity demand had been stagnant for decades before accelerating during the artificial intelligence mania. Commercial power use is likely to surpass residential use next year for the first time, according to the Energy Information Administration. At the urging of President Trump, big tech companies have promised to cover the costs to power data centers. Microsoft is asking Arizona regulators to allow it and other large electricity users to build their own power plants instead of relying on utility-owned generation that other consumers wind up paying for. Since we first began operations in Arizona in 2021, Microsoft has committed to paying our own way to ensure our data centers don't increase electricity prices, said Jeff Riles, the company's senior director of energy markets. APS said it is working on a way for large customers to develop their own power generation, but it can't compromise reliability or affordability. Fairly allocating infrastructure costs among groups of customers is complex. Utilities have been making investments not only to support data centers, but also upgrade the grid to withstand more extreme weather and replace aging infrastructure, changes that benefit all customers. There are more than 120 cases across the country of utilities wrestling with how to charge giant customers, according to utility filings aggregated by the AI startup Halcyon. Rate settings is overseen by state regulators during year-long legal processes like the one unfolding in Phoenix, where customers and advocacy groups can petition to participate. Arizona's 5 elected utility commissioners will likely set the APS rate rise later this year. They last approved an increase in 2024, when the utility had requested a 13.6% bump for the most consumers and got 8%. Gessler said the APS chief said higher rates are needed to cover what has been spent for upgrades and repairs to the grid. Rising inflation, higher interest rates, and supply chain volatility have driven up project costs. Prices for some transformers have jumped 90% in recent years, Geisler added. Until 2 years ago, APS connected new customers to the grid as they signed up for service. Now, it is preparing to add customers requesting more than 4,000 megawatts of service, and an estimated 19,000 megawatts of requests are waiting in a queue, more than twice the system's peak demand. Jane Anderson, Arizona state leader for Mormon Women for Ethical Government, said she is concerned residents and small businesses will end up subsidizing the power needs of data centers. She called APS' proposed 14.5% rate increase for households out of line with national averages. Low-income families and seniors on fixed incomes already struggle to afford their bills, and air conditioning is a must, she said. Arizona's Attorney General, Chris Mays, a Democrat and former utility commissioner, wants to see data centers carry a heavier share of the burden. Even a 45% rate increase won't fully cover the cost to plug them in, she said, while arguing residential customers should see about a 3% hike. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Blanche to receive Attorney General nod by Sadie Gurman, Washington. President Trump said he plans to nominate Todd Blanche to be Attorney General, giving a show of confidence to his former criminal defense lawyer, who has refocused the Justice Department to benefit the president's allies and target his critics. The president said during a private dinner at the White House Wednesday that he would instruct staff on Thursday to start the process to make Blanche the permanent Attorney General. Trump said he believed the process would go very quickly. Video of his remarks were shared on social media by White House Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino. Blanche, serving as the acting Attorney General, said he was honored and humbled. Since Blanche assumed the role on a temporary basis in April, after the ouster of Pam Bondi, he has taken a number of steps that have pleased Trump and mollified some hard-right skeptics. He has urged prosecutors, for example, to accelerate the pace of investigation of Trump's favorite targets and rolled back gun and drug policies as sought by his base. But in recent days, Blanche has faced backlash from some of the same Republican senators whose support he needs to secure confirmation after he championed plans for a $1.8 billion fund that would have paid out Trump's followers and allies who alleged political prosecution by prior administrations. Unhappy Senate Republicans, confronted Blanche about the fund at a contentious GOP conference meeting last month. On Tuesday, Blanche said he was abandoning the plan. Blanche also continues to face criticism over the Justice Department's release of millions of files from the FBI's investigation into convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Asked whether he thought Blanche could get enough votes to secure a nomination, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, R. San Diego, told reporters, "It's hard to say. This is an environment where nothing is safe or sure thing." Blanche on Thursday described his relationship with senators as good. After Trump complained the Justice Department was moving too slowly to bring prosecutions he called for under Bondi's leadership, Blanche has moved to advance those investigations. Among the moves drawing attention, Blanche added staff to investigation whether government officials engaged in a conspiracy to undermine Trump's first presidency. Blanche also unveiled a new indictment against James Comey over a photo of seashells posted on social media by the former Federal Bureau of Investigation director, which stipulated the numbers 86 and 47. Prosecutor said the post could be interpreted as a threat to kill Trump. It is the Trump administration's second attempt to prosecute Comey, who has become a prominent critic of the president. Trump has viewed Comey as a nemesis since he oversaw the FBI's investigation into alleged ties between Russia and the Trump campaign. Comey has said he is innocent and the target is political retribution. Another criminal case brought against Comey by the Justice Department was dismissed last year. The Venezuelan left is at war with itself. Cooperation with the U.S. exposes rifts inside acting leader's socialist movement by Cajal Valles. Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, is facing growing resistance from an unlikely source, the leftist movement that brought her to power. 5 months after U.S. commandos ousted strongman Nicolas Maduro, figures within the ruling socialist movement known as Chavismo, after former President Hugo Chavez, are openly criticizing Rodriguez for accommodating Washington as she works to stabilize the country and deepen ties within the Trump administration. Former ministers, party intellectuals, and leftist voices accuse her of surrendering sovereignty, opening the economy to foreign interests, and sidelining loyalists who spent decades building a movement party defined to opposition to U.S. influence. The rare public dissent exposes widening cracks inside Chavismo, which for a generation cast itself as a bulwark against U.S. power while cultivating ties with Russia, China, and Iran. Now many of its veterans are struggling to reconcile the movement's anti-imperialist roots with a government that depends heavily on U.S. support. Since Maduro's removal on January 3rd, Rodriguez's government has rewritten energy and mining regulations to attract foreign capital, surrendered enriched uranium held at a research facility to the U.S., and extracted Maduro ally Alex Saab to Miami to face money laundering charges. For many Chavistas, the symbolism has just as jarring as the policy changes. In recent weeks, 2 U.S. Marine Corps NB-22 Osprey aircraft landing at the U.S. Embassy compound in Venezuela's capital, Caracas, during a military evacuation drill, a public display of U.S. military reach that upset many Slovakians. President Trump also has floated the idea of making Venezuela the 51st state and joked that it might someday run for president there. Among the loudest critics is Mario Silva, a founding member of the ruling United Socialist Party of Venezuela and one of the architects of its media apparatus. For years, Silva hosted a popular state television program that attacked political opponents and denounced alleged U.S. interference in Venezuelan affairs. The TV show ended in March, and he now airs a program online to expose the contradictions under Rodriguez's rule. We've already lost our sovereignty, our freedom, and our independence, Silva said. Venezuela's information ministry didn't respond to calls and emails seeking comment. Other critics, including former Vice President Elias Juana, have denounced Rodriguez's economic changes and accused a small circle around the acting president of making decisions without consulting the movement's traditional base. Left-wing academics and activists who once formed the intellectual backbone of Chavismo says they have been pushed aside as Rodriguez courts foreign investments and U.S. backing. The criticism reflects an identity crisis inside a movement built around resistance to Washington by Chavez, who died from cancer in 2013. Officials aligned with Rodriguez have dismissed the complaints as an effort to manufacture divisions. This is a psychological media campaign on social media against Chavismo, said Jorge Arezna, a pro-government lawmaker and former minister. Rodriguez said she is working with the U.S. to reverse the damage from years of mismanagement as well as sanctions leveled by Washington. So far, she has kept much of Maduro's ruling circle, including the powerful Interior Minister Diosdado Cabala, on her side. That has won praise from the U.S., who is seeking stability, and she's relaxed many of the punitive restrictions on Venezuela's oil and financial sectors. Many party members initially argued that Rodriguez deserved latitude to navigate an extraordinary transition after Maduro's removal. It's like trying to govern with a pistol pointing at your neck, said former lawmaker Juan Cortez. But patience has worn thin as U.S. influence has expanded. Hardliners were angered by an amnesty law signed by Rodriguez that released hundreds of dissidents, viewing it as an acknowledgement that the government had held political prisoners, something previous administrations denied. Others have bristled at symbolic changes, including Rodriguez's shift away from the movement's trademark red imagery to a light blue. Red used to mean combat, Silva said. The pale blue was just the masses to sleep. Polling suggests Rodriguez has struggled to build support beyond the coalition back in her ties with Washington. Her approval rating fell to about 25% in an Australian Bloomberg poll conducted in late May. For veterans of the movement, the grievances are both ideological and personal. Many spent decades defending a project that promised to stand up to U.S., and now they watch U.S. officials help shape Venezuela's future while Chavez's legacy recedes. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 5th issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. and Friday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Donald. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the Buffalo Criterion. At 8 o'clock, we have the New York Times. And at 9 o'clock, we have Discover Magazine. Stay with us for these readings and more. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which